I want to say welcome to the Bay Area Book Festival's Talking Single Motherhood, Community, and Black Girl Magic with Novelist Jayne Allen. I want to take a quick moment to ask anyone that has their phones on, myself included actually, to mute them. Let me actually do that. And so I'm Justin Phillips. I write a column for the San Francisco Chronicle about race and inequality in the Bay Area. And in a previous life, I used to write about restaurants out here. So, and I want everyone to join me in thanking Pegasus Books for their generous sponsorship of our discussion. They've helped to make this whole event possible. And I want to remind folks there's a book signing and sale area from Pegasus Books in the tent at the park at 4:45 p.m. So it is my pleasure to introduce novelist Jayne Allen. She's the author of Black Girls Must Be Magic, which gives us a portrait of single motherhood by choice that upends all preconceptions, the latest installment in Jayne's Black Girls Must Die Exhausted series. She calls it Chocolate Chick-Lit with a Conscience.
Yes.
So it's the timely and enjoyable tale of a sophisticated working woman, Tabitha, and her journey through life, relationships, and motherhood. Jayne writes fiction out of life experiences and strives to tell stories, quote, that stick to your bones, calling it the remarkable texture of her memorable characters, fragments of reality strung together by imagination. She's a completely compelling writer, and I am very excited to do this. Jayne, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So we spoke before, and this is one of those moments where I was just so excited to talk about everything, because we tried to do a little bit of planning behind the scenes, and I'm like, oh, I want to touch on this and this and this. So I'm trying to be focused here, and we're going to start just on the title. So if I say Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, Black Girl Magic, like these are specific phrases and compelling titles, and I want to know the thought process that goes into them.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'm so excited to be here. And you have an amazing column, so I'm super excited to have this conversation with you in particular. The titles for the book, and the first book, Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, for me, what I wanted to do in the title was to come up with something that rang true, that almost was poetic in a sense, that would touch on something that sounded like it had been said before, that it was so, it felt so true, it spoke to something, it said something that had been felt but had gone unsaid. Mm-hmm. But once you hear it, it's like, I know I must have heard that from like my grandmother or or my great grandmother. So that was what I was digging for when I was thinking about the title, and I wanted to try to encapsulate the experience of what it feels like to be Black, and as a woman, and in contemporary society, and then try through the power of literature and story to transmute that into something that had an emotional payoff. And I think we talked about when we were planning, mm-hmm. that one of the things for me was that I do not write raw trauma. I do not write unprocessed trauma. One of the things that I really wanted to do was take the traumatic experiences as I've come to understand them and attach them to the payoff, attach the beauty to the experience that we face, the challenges, attach the I guess the treasure that comes internally that it creates of a person going through the experiences that we are caused to go through societally. So I wanted that to be what the title could represent, and then that became sort of a theme as the series evolved, that each of these titles, I wanted them to have a deeper meaning where it spoke to something that was a deeper truth that would be provocative, and could tell its own story, but through the story would derive a meaning that became much deeper.
That's great. And I think there's an element, like, we spoke about this, of normalizing Black experiences,
yes.
In your work. And so For me, as a black dude consumer of literature, like, I could see a title, "Black Girls Must Die Exhausted." Not read the book, but in my head be like, oh yeah, this is a very true phrase. I don't know the context of it, but I understand it. But I want to talk to you about that normalizing blackness in literature, because oftentimes it's kind of cordoned off to these areas of, whether it's like politically charged or racially charged, but rarely do we get like this spectrum of just life itself. And I know that's something that you prioritize, but like this normalizing of your experience, of my experience, in books, like why is that such a, first I want to know, is it difficult, but why is it so important to you?
Well, when I first, it never occurred to me that I would be a novelist. It wasn't something that was on the list of possibilities, and part of that is because the range of literature that featured black stories and featured black people was so narrow, and those that wrote about it, especially who were black, was so small. Growing up and referencing it, it's continued to expand, but it's still been representatively tiny relative to the entire sampling of literature that's available. So that was not a thought. So for me, when I decided, okay, this needs to be done, one of the things that compelled me to do it was that black stories should not be otherized, that these are human stories. We are human beings, and there's a societally created experience of race that we go through, but we are human beings going through that societally created experience. We're not some other, alien species. that blackness is a creation, is a man-made creation, a societal creation, a societally propagated experience. So what I wanted to do in my work, and I thought was so important, which I hope would help further the cause of diversifying the field, is to insist on the humanity of this story, and then also insist on the perspective of blackness. This is what happens with a human being when you unpack and show the layers of experience that they are subject to if they are black. So that was what I charged myself with, and that was what I wanted to create. And it was very important to me to make the book unapologetically black perspective-wise and undeniably human experience-wise, so that anybody should be able to read this book and say, oh, this is a human story. This protagonist, Tabby, has something to teach from a human perspective, and also gain an appreciation for her perspective and what she's living from the societally crafted experience. So that was what was really important to me, and my goal was to hopefully make people realize that black stories are human stories and just keep drilling that. So that's what I do, that's what I've been doing, and that's what I intend to continue to do.
I'm curious too, like as people read your work, are there moments where someone who is not from our demographic, reaches out to you and says that they can see themselves in Tabitha, or they can see themselves in another character? And I bet that must be fulfilling, but I'd love to hear you talk about that as well.
It is fulfilling. The thing that was most important to me was that black women said to me, I can see myself. Yes, thank you for seeing us. Thank you for the story. This is meaningful to me. This is representative of me. That was the most important thing, and that was the core when I originally put this book out. That was the core response. That was the core audience, and that was the most important thing. And then secondarily, and also in tandem, when the story started to go wider and the book started to have a wider reach, hearing from people who were not women, who were not black women, who were not living this experience of Tabitha, but saying, on the surface, we could not be more different, but Tabitha is me, and I am Tabitha. I've heard this from the broadest rainbow, widest representation of humanity. I've heard it so many times that it's affirming to me, and I also share that with the audience for my book as much as I can, that, look, this is actually uniting us in so many ways. And we have so much more in common than what we would think, because we're constantly reminded of the divisions that we have. But from my vantage point, when I'm getting responses from readers and seeing the representation, no, this is affirming. Especially, I think it's important as a Black woman to know that my humanity is it translates, that it is connecting with people, that people are understanding my value, the value of my story, the value of my experience. And I think that's something that I hope to that people become more and more aware of, because I just think we do need that validation.
I'm curious about this too. I feel like a Black woman's experience in life is the perfect canvas in literature to explore a lot of societal issues. But I would like to ask a Black woman if that is true, and why that might be the best canvas. Like those, because there are universal elements. But why is that? And focusing on Tabitha too in this as well.
Yeah, well, I'll say it from my perspective, but also as Tabitha as representation. So I chose for her to be a journalist, because as a journalist, her job is to see and be seen. And so that means that the societal constructs, the viewers, the being judged by ratings, it's amplifying the societal experience that a lot of us feel about judgments of our hair, our complexion, and assumptions of the validity of our perspectives and our stories. She's facing this in a very augmented way, because not only is it her day-to-day experience, but her job, her livelihood, so much of her focus is that. And so with this particular character, the real lesson for her is authenticity. And who better to teach a lesson of authenticity, finding your authentic voice, finding the courage to live your authentic self. A Black woman is perfectly situated to tell that story, because so much of our being is policed. From our hair texture to decisions that we make as it pertains to motherhood, to how loud we are, to the colors we wear, to how long our nails are, if to our body types, our body shapes. So all of that, finding a way to live out loud authentically as who you are and what you want, is perfect. Everybody can relate to that to varying degrees, but in a lot of ways, who better to hear that journey from than a Black woman who also is being judged by this secondary, societal eye on her, and a grade that she gets in the form of ratings. So,
I don't want to. I'm sure there's some people out here who haven't read the book that we're going to talk about.
We won't spoil it for them. Right?
Yeah. Actually, we're just going to tell them the ending real quick.
Okay. Then we out. Okay.
But I would, before I get into this next question, which is about Tabitha, and I probably got ahead of myself here, but could you give people who may not have read it an understanding of what Black Girls Must Be Magic is actually about?
Sure. So Black Girls Must Be Magic is the continuation of Tabby's journey in Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. That was the first book. And to quickly summarize the first book and spoil it a little bit, Tabby, in the very first pages, finds out she's 33 years old, finds out she has a reproductive health crisis that fast forwards her family planning and what she has to make decisions about what she's going to do if she's going to have a biological family. And she's in a relationship, but the relationship is not, they're not on the same page about this, and so ultimately she has to make a decision for herself, and she has to weigh that against the societal constraints and projections of what it means, especially for a Black woman, to embark upon motherhood as a single woman. And so that journey continues into the second book, where she winds up pregnant. So I will not spoil how this happens, but it's the first book gave me the opportunity to explore IVF, reproductive health, disparate health outcomes for Black women, a lot of things that we don't really talk about and see in fiction or not, especially not in fiction, but even in nonfiction, there's just so little about that. And there's this myth of the hyperfertility of the Black woman that's a complete myth. So I thought it was a great opportunity to showcase this, to discuss this, and to bring a little bit of the life that so many people are living into this fictional experience, that people can relate to. And so in the second book, she's pregnant, she's a single mom, and she's got to figure out, again, continuing that journey of authenticity, how is she going to live her life? Who is she going to be? Because now it's not just the eyes of the audience on her, she's internalizing that she's about to become a mother, and it's going to be the eyes of her child that are going to be on her. And so the title, Black Girls Must Be Magic, is sort of this double meaning, as my titles tend to be, but it's not just about the magic of being a single mother and acknowledging the magic that you have to kind of corral and harness to do that, but it's also the necessity to be more than, to be superhuman, to just make it along the way in so many ways, whether you decide to embark on the journey of motherhood or not. So it's an acknowledgement and a celebration again of some the decisions that women are called upon to make.
So how much of you is written into the Tabitha character? Because I always wonder, like, what do you keep for yourself?
Yeah.
What do you give the reader?
Yeah.
Or, in this fictional space, are you opening yourself up and giving everything? Like, how do you prioritize what to give and what to keep? And how much crossover is there?
Well, so I give everything in a sense, and I keep for myself. There's a portion that I keep to myself, and then there's sort of this everything that I'm trying to give away. Like my goal is, if I'm doing my job, and I get to where I really want to get to, I'll give you everything, and I give it all away. I'm not there yet as an artist or as an author. I'm working on it. That's a lot. But I've been doing my best. Like, I don't write unprocessed trauma, like I said. So it's what I've processed through and what I've come to understand and what I've worked through that I can put into the stories. Things that I've really gained even as difficult as they may be, but things that I've gained an understanding about. I try to put that into the story. There's textures of people that I've picked up along the way in life that I weave into my characters. There's things that I feel like I'm the only person that saw this one particular thing, and I bring that into stories because I want other people to see it too. Some, kind of freakish thing that I happen to see I don't know, a display of humanity that I just thought was compelling or fascinating that taught me something important about life. I use my work, my fiction, to bring that to other people as I've processed it and can make it relatable. So a lot of Tabby is not me. Mark is no particular person, and that's not my story. But so many of the characters are reflections of me, and there's little bits of me everywhere.
I've so like in columns, I've advocated for Black and brown folks to be open to mental health services if they need them, if they need to see a therapist or something like that. I want to ask, like, in the context of writing this book, and this is just something that popped into my mind, but I imagine that you go through life like seeing things as yourself and then seeing through the eyes of Tabitha as well. And in a way, because you talked about not writing about unprocessed trauma, but if you have such a full character that you've built, like, is there a way to kind of lean into that character and be like, I wonder how Tabitha would in real life, like, I wonder how Tabitha would respond to this, and does that help? Like, how do you, because I imagine you carry this character around with you.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that the thing that I love the most about writing is character development, and I'm really crafting these characters as if they're people. I have it might be a 100-point list. Like, how does this person respond to this? Who, just crafting these people, and I feel like that's really a lot of the art of it for me. It's so much fun. And then as I'm crafting the story, there's plot points, but the best part is just putting these characters into play with each other, just getting them into the scene and then setting something in motion and seeing what happens. And one of the most instructive things for me was, people say to me a lot, well, there's so many issues in these stories, there's so many things that are happening in the stories and the things that these characters are dealing with. And I thought about that, and I said, well, yeah, it is, because that's how much it took to get these very strong Black women past that veneer of strength into a place of vulnerability that we don't get to see. And that was what I wanted. That was the point of the story, in a sense, to like go to the place where you can't be the strong Black woman anymore, where that the real part that nobody gets to see, that we don't get to articulate, that we don't show, is in the pages. And I had to throw fireballs. I had to get dragons. I mean, not actual dragons, but there were so many things that I had to throw at these characters to push them there.
Yeah.
And that taught me something about how much we carry. And there's a beauty in that strength, but there's also it's tragic.
Yeah.
And so I hope, and what I've seen in talking to readers is that in coming into these stories, that there's a space created where if you can see the vulnerability in these characters, you can see them in their vulnerable space, and thankfully you don't have to go through what they went through, but if you can see them in their vulnerable space, it is a permission granting experience that now people reading can find that space for themselves and then within groups and go there and be there. And I think it's necessary in our community. I think it's necessary in our society. So if these characters can do that for readers and for me too, I'm happy with that.
That's great. I was telling you this before, like I have an obsession with how Black women authors write Black male characters in their books.
Honestly, because it's like it's a very dynamic portrayal. We know that the Black male character in media can be like pigeonholed to one thing and something else, but the way that Black women do it, it's very honest. And there's a character named Mark in this book where there are times where I'm like, I know this fool, that's my cousin, the way he's behaving. There are other times where I'm like, oh shit, is Mark me? Am I Mark? But the fact that I can like bounce back and forth between, varying shades of recognizable is significant. But I can also tell that the Black male character in this book is written with a sense of love that you don't find in other spaces, and you also probably wouldn't find unless it's a Black woman author who's writing it. And so can you talk about that process, like being able to build up these, the male characters so they're dynamic in these books? I think it's really interesting.
Well, I have had the benefit of dealing with, in my life, some very complicated people. Very, very difficult personalities, and especially in my 30s, and I'm in my mid-40s now. And I had to really process that. Like I said, and I think a lot of my own life trauma has come at the hands of dealing with traumatized people. And I had to really understand that at a certain point, because when you don't process it, it's just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this person did this, and they're the villain. But as you mature, and as I matured, and as I have grown in my empathy and compassion, especially through writing, I'm able to see that there is no such thing as a villain. There's a person who does stuff, and there's a reason why they did it. And for Mark, and as a character, he has baggage, just like Tabby, just like every character, and he does stuff, but there's a reason why he did it. And I thought it was so important to know the reason why he did it, and I thought it was important for the reader to understand, whether you agree with what he did or not, to understand that there was a reason why he did it. And the same with every other character, to even as I'm writing things, what their reactions are, what they do, what happens in the story, I always know why they did it. I always know that, and I think that's just so important. And so with Mark, there's an understanding that the things that he does, some of them are fantastic. I just think he's a great character, and he was so much fun to write. But some of the things that he does are great, and some of the things that he does, I don't know if anybody would agree with. It's like, oh man, really? But
Those are the parts where I'm like, oh shit, am I wrong? That's what I'm referencing.
I mean,
Yeah.
But there's reasons why, and I thought that was so important to understand. And I think it's also important to understand from the perspective of humanizing our experience. We deal with societal trauma, especially as Black people, so significantly and so continuously throughout history and even to this day. It's persecution in a lot of ways. It's continuous ongoing trauma. So when you see people and you see them doing things, it's so important to understand this is a human being doing things, and there's a reason why they did it. And that's what I think that the love for my characters and the love for humanity and the love for the people that I'm writing about is knowing that and holding a space of compassion. Like, I may not agree with you, and I may not be able to be close to you because you may be, it may not be safe, but for various reasons, emotionally or otherwise, but I'm still rooting for you because I know there's a path forward and I know there's a why. And I think the why is just the most important thing.
Yeah, and so thinking of Tabitha, like her support system, like that community, I absolutely love, and you do a great job of, building up the characters of her friends, the older, women that are in her life, and it made me think about like those community circles in real life in Black families. Like how to explain this? Like there's a very real danger, depending on how close-knit your family is, to be stuck in this like perpetual state of adolescence where our elders dictate our decisions, right? We're like, ooh, don't do that, do that. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna listen to grandma. Like that's what I'm gonna do. But you do a really good job of, and on the surface, that like level of involvement in community, like someone who's not familiar with it might be like, that's a little toxic and weird, but we lean on each other in really healthy ways. Was it hard, I guess, and I know it was really important for you, but was it hard what went into accurately conveying that community on the page, where it's like it is a healthy balance that has, varying degrees of positive and negative, but it all, helps form the whole person? Like what went into being able to accurately portray that?
The main, again, it was character development. That to me, if I could say, this is the part of the art that I love the most. It's just thinking of these characters, crafting these characters, and the characters I had the most fun crafting were the ones that were of the older generation, and Tabby's grandmother and her best friend. And I thought it was so important to have that in contemporary fiction, especially for a Black character, because we do have close-knit families, and that is part of the realistic portrayal of our cultural experience and one of the beauties of our culture. And so bringing that into the story authentically, there's because she visits her grandmother every week, and because there's this whole swath of, her grandmother lives in an assisted living community, and she goes there every week, so she interacts with her grandmother and her grandmother's best friend and some of the other people that are there. And that was informed by my real life experience. My grandmother, in the last years of her life, was in an assisted living facility, and we would go visit, and I would always think to myself, wow, there's all these people that have lived so much life, and we've kind of sequestered them elsewhere, and all these treasures and gems of wisdom and life experience are kind of locked away, and I always wondered, what are they thinking? What do you think, at this point, and how can that, and I was in my early 30s, and I was like, how can this inform the rest of my life? How can I live my life so that this person that I'll eventually become is really satisfied with the decisions I made? And so that was such a monumental thing that stuck with me. So I wanted to bring that into Tabby's story and give her the benefit of that perspective, so she could use that to make her informed decisions in this journey that she was going to take through the story.
Yeah. And also there's as far as like her actual friend group goes as well. Yeah. I love the dynamics there, but it's not like I'll say something negative. I love the dynamics.
There's some crazy people.
Yeah, I love the dynamics there, period.
Stuff going on.
And so I'm curious about, your own personal social circles. Like, is there a lot of crossover? Are you do you pull from, you know, the personal moments that you have with like your friends like that? Like,
If you ask my friends, they will say yes, but none of my friends are reflected in this story.
Gotcha.
But I had one. There's a scene in one of the books, and the characters are going through like a fight, and one of my friends called me. She was so upset. She's like, "Why did you write about my, you know, my life in your book?" And I thought that was confidential. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And so I was like, honestly, that was the first. That was not on my radar. But it was a good thing to hear. But no, I do not. I try to make it realistic, and I try to write what these people that I've crafted would do in these situations. So I think what informs it is just the value and benefit of sisterhood and friendship. And thinking about, you know, again, when thinking Black girls must die exhausted in this, you know, I'm showing what's in the backpack that we carry. It's unpacking what's in the backpack, and emphasizing the need for support, self-care, community, all of the things that when life would tear you down, the things that keep you going, that hold you together. That's what Tabby's showing us, and part of that is her community of friends, her sisterhood, her interaction with her elders, her grandmother's best friend. She has all of this fabric that holds her together when everything else would tear her apart.
So if anything wild happens among your friends, are they like, "You're gonna put this in your book, aren't
Happens
you?"
all the time. Happens all the time.
Oh my goodness. So, and then talking about like these friends and these interactions, like one of the things that I do love and I think often gets overlooked is dialogue in books. And, you know, depending on what you read, Black characters in certain books, if they're like, you know, supposed to represent X, Y, and Z, might have like a weird kind of dialogue that's written for them. But the way that you did it felt really natural and very familiar. Does a lot of thought go into like, or is it just an afterthought? Like it seemed like there was a specific approach, but I'm curious, like when it comes to actual dialogue between the characters.
My first novel, I had no idea what I was doing. So, so I just did what I wanted to do, and I wrote the book that I wanted to read. That I thought, oh my gosh, I will read this book, and this is something I would enjoy, even if I was incredibly busy at the time. I was flying 150,000 miles a year for work, and I wanted a book that I could just fall into, and it would, play out in the theater of my mind for me. And so that was what I wrote. And when I did the dialogue, for me, I felt like that was really important because, again, I wanted these characters to play with each other and show us the other side of humanity that we don't always get to see. But because I wanted to be culturally authentic, I wanted the dialogue to be authentic. I wanted to show code switching. I wanted to show, what it sounds like in the hair salon when you go get your hair done, what your hairdresser sounds like. And she may not speak perfect English, but she's brilliant. She's gonna say something that's just like so profound, or that you need to take notes, or your hairdressers, your therapist, your comedian, your all of these things. And there's just a certain reverence for the contents of what that person's saying, regardless of how it comes about. And I think that is, again, part of what as Black people we deal with. It's like, if something's not said in the way that you expect it to be said, then don't lose the importance of the content of what's being said, or the wisdom that's being imparted, or the life experience and the value that's coming across just because it's unfamiliar. So I wanted to be authentic with how each of these characters was expressing themselves, so that you don't, because everything that they're saying is important, and I want the reader to know not to miss that. And then if you come out of the book and you go into the rest of your life, that's the lesson. That's one of the lessons, hopefully, that comes out of that reading experience.
And so and you mentioned this before, like the exploring the idea of, fertility, or just the birthing journey for Black women isn't something that's really kind of conveyed in literature. Like you don't really read about it that often. And for the most part, like in general, it's, I guess like white childbearing is supposed to be the more beneficial of the two, or that brings joy and all these other experiences, but we don't really hear a lot about the Black women perspective, and especially when it comes to fertility issues. And so there's a lot that that we can branch off of this, but I want to open it up to you to see where you want to take it. What was the research for you that went into, because I imagine like there's aspects of like the dangers of childbirth for Black women, fertility data. Like, I'm sure that you poured over so many things to be able to put them in this character, but I'd be curious, like, give us an idea of the scope of research that went into this.
So I did have to do quite a bit of research because, again, the character is a Black woman, and there's proven, scientific data about disparate health outcomes for Black mothers. And so that was part of my research, to be authentic to this particular perspective and experience for Tabby. So I was researching, there's unfortunate stories of people who would otherwise have every privilege that society would afford, but for being Black, they didn't survive childbirth. They didn't make it successfully into motherhood. And there were multiple stories that I read about that. So I had to internalize that on behalf of Tabby and craft this experience for her, knowing that there's also the stigma of Black single mothers. There's even the concept of like single motherhood and single motherhood by choice. I had to really unpack that and think about that. That there's this nomenclature that people are very intentional about how they pick words and how they use words. And to say single mother by choice, which is something that is a commonly said thing, well, it's single mother, right? But then why is the by choice there? And like, what are you distinguishing from? And then internalizing that, wow, is this being distinguished from the single motherhood that's vilified and most oftenly commonly associated with a Black woman's face and story, that is a drain on society or something negative. So I thought it was really, really important to share this perspective and to think through all of the layers that this particular person would have to navigate through in making these choices for herself. In this particular case, Tabby's faced with a reproductive health crisis that accelerates her timing, and she's got to make decisions independent of her relationship status. But she also has to make those decisions as a Black woman and as a woman and in society and with the constraints that she would face. So that was part of my research and just really trying to understand that, and figuring out how do I convey this and how do I make this a part of the decisions that she would make. Like, for example, she chooses to have a doula, and Tabby would do that because of her. She can afford to do it, and because she would know that would help even out the health outcome for her as a Black mother. So that was a lot of the research that I did. And I mean, there were heartbreaking stories. So I hope that the conversations hopefully that come from this book, and that this book brings up, what at least have some acknowledgement to that and bring some awareness.
Yeah, and what your book did is something that, like, me getting to write my column does, is learn different perspectives about issues that I thought I knew enough about. And you're talking about like Black single motherhood, and so like a while ago I wrote about something that you researched, which was like traumatic birthing experiences for Black mothers, which also touched on single Black motherhood. And I realized, like, in the larger conversation in society about single motherhood in the Black community, like, there's this misunderstanding of the dynamic approaches that might be taken to raise a child. There might be like economic barriers that keep people from getting married or being together. And there might be different reasons for someone not living in the same house, but that child can be raised by two loving parents the same way. It may not look like the two kids and the picket fence and the dogs that but like, it is a positive experience. And so you also are like, I don't want to say anything about the third book or where this goes, but I feel like the foundation is being laid to show
how like how involved a community can be in raising a child, and how like there shouldn't be such a narrow view of single motherhood.
Yeah.
And I feel like you're kind of setting the stage for that, but like, is there a need to explain how dynamic that experience can be?
Well, I think that the stigma I think that there's a societally imposed stigma, and I think it's unfair, and I think that it should be celebrated. I think that motherhood in all forms and all the decisions that one would make as it pertains to motherhood take courage. Whether it's to say I don't want to be a mother, whether it's to say I do, and however that looks, partnered, unpartnered, single, and otherwise, there is a level of courage and that needs to be celebrated. And I think unpacking the experience of it paves the way for that, because once you start to expand the accordion and you really look at it, you really look at what all of that takes, you'd patch your, you would have to. And so that was, I guess, part of this, the books, part of the purpose of the books is to expand the accordion and to be able to look at the details that we gloss over. We talk about these topics as high level issues, but we're not really getting into the granularity of the experience. And we're not celebrating the people that are making the courageous decisions as part of those experiences. So that's part of what this story is about, and reclaiming the humanity that has been compromised through societally imposed stigmas that are they're just unfair.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, there also is
Like in your book, a significant narrative, I think, is body autonomy, whether it's black hairstyles and you even like weaved in the Crown Act into the piece, which I'm like, damn, this is a good book. But like the idea of body autonomy, and I feel like that is a worthwhile subject to tackle right now, because
Today, yeah.
we just had that leaked draft opinion about Roe v. Wade and potentially overturning it, and I feel like the concept of body autonomy, for women is really important to discuss right now. I know the book is already written, but is there something about this moment that might fuel future work for you? Did it make you think of something that you want to weave into your writing, or I just want to open this space for you to talk about it? Because we mentioned this.
Yeah.
We had this in the background.
Well, I mean, I think even when we talk about the leaked opinion, and there's a footnote in it that references abortion as black genocide. Like, why would that? Just these presumptions that come along with motherhood and perception of, especially as it pertains to black mothers, it's kind of already baked in there. And again, when I said is, you think about expanding the accordion of of the experience of it all. We gloss over the 10 months, almost 10 months of pregnancy and the health risks and all of the things associated with that. We gloss over the experience of childbirth and the health risks and the experience of that and the disparate outcomes. We gloss over the experience of parenting and all the decisions and sacrifices that come along with that. So when we start talking about these topics as sort of like one-word issues, like abortion or right to, no, it's right to your 10 months of life and what happens in this experience. It's your right to what being in a life or death experience of childbirth. It's the sacrifices that are economic and otherwise that come along with the experience of parenting. And if you're not talking about all of that in the midst of this topic, then you're not talking about the topic. You're not debating the issue. And regardless of what position you're taking for or against, if you're not talking about all those things, then you are not talking about the issue. You're just talking about words.
Yeah, I was thinking like,
yes. And I want to gear shift just a little bit because we're going to run up on time for Q&A. So I want to circle back to something. And I mentioned this to you. Tabitha is a journalist. I personally feel like, journalists are great canvases to base characters on. They're, interesting people, whatever, man.
I
And
might have a character named Justin.
oh God. That would be the funny time where I'm reading the book. I'm like, damn, Justin seemed like me. But I am curious about this because we talked about body autonomy. There's no more intense space for an individual to be scrutinized than like daily TV news reporters or anchors. And so what I guess it makes sense that she would be a journalist, but I want to hear like why you why you made that her profession.
Yeah, I had to think about that with again when I was crafting this character because I kind of knew the story I wanted to tell, and I was like, okay, now what is her job? and then that was what occurred to me that this is the perfect job for her. She has to be a news reporter, and she has to be on camera because again, the societal. I wanted to unpack these societally imposed projections and stigmas and all of these. Beliefs and judgments, and so to have a character that has all of this amplified, where we can really kind of expand the accordion and look at it, it's like the things that we gloss over. If you, like I was telling somebody, if you told the real story of a Black woman showing up to her workplace, especially if it was a predominantly white space, with her wearing her natural hair, or a more culturally authentic hairstyle than just wearing it straight. Not that wearing it straight is not culturally authentic, but if you just told that story of how she got to that place, you would have a really compelling novel, because the choices she'd have to make, the way she'd talk herself into it, out of it, the people that would tell her do it, don't do it, what happened in the hair salon, how much money she spent, all of that would be a 400-page epic saga. But in a lot of stories, you just see, this person showing up with crinkly hair and a spunky attitude. Like, well, no, who is this person? So I really wanted to do with this story was like kind of tell that epic story out of everyday experiences that we typically would gloss over. And so Tabby, being a newscaster, gave that opportunity.
So, and here we're going to switch gears again a little bit. So it feels like there's a long overdue, but maybe even renewed in some aspects, attention on Black literature, on the talent of Black authors, and obviously I feel like it's a byproduct of 2020 and all these calls for social racial justice. And I don't know if you've seen it, being in this business. Like, has there been a higher interest in like Black perspectives? And I'm also curious, because I'm a pessimist, where I'm like, it's not gonna last. Like, it's they're reacting to this thing. I hope it does, but I'd be curious to get your perspective. Like, is it are Black authors more in demand? Does it feel like something that will last? Like, is there a genuine curiosity here?
I think there is a genuine curiosity, and I think there is a genuine interest to have more Black authors, but I also think that it's conceptual. And I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in making space for the stories that Black authors want to tell authentically, and respecting, and not just Black authors, but just underrepresented perspectives. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in making space for that, because the way that the publishing industry works is there's a lot of projection that's done on behalf of what the audience might want, and it's a business, so that makes sense. You have to, there's a risk tolerance there, and the risk tolerance is low because the margins are slim, and there's just a lot to this business. I mean, so there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and creative thinking that needs to happen to create that space, to make space so that writers who have underrepresented perspectives can tell the story they want to tell, and it may not look like something that's going to sell, but it should be put out anyway. And that's what I think we're not there exactly yet. So, well, we're not there yet, but hopefully, I think the space of, I think that we're making the spaces, and the progress is happening to get there.
Great.
And that's being optimistic.
But
That's perfect. So we're going to take a little bit of time now for audience questions. So if you have a question, there's a festival staff person that has a microphone that will be sanitized between each person. If you want to come up and have something that you're curious about, whether it's about the book or anything like that, just speak directly into the microphone. We'll take it on. Don't make a school teacher this stuff and just start calling out people.
call it people.
Hi, this is an extension of Justin's question. You'd also mentioned before that you were working to change the publishing process and industry as sort of your second job. So I'm wondering, in addition to what you just said, like how you would ideally see the publishing world, what else would need to change?
That's a good question.
Come to the panel tomorrow at 12:30 and we'll talk about that. So I think I'm working to answer that question. And the journey in my book was very unique. I wrote the manuscript, I queried agents. I was told that my Black female protagonist was unrelatable, and the story, they didn't love her. It was just the feedback I got. We don't love her, we don't love this, this is unrelatable, which is ironic because it became a Target club pick, which is about as mainstream as you can get. So, I mean, it's just, there's so much that was wrong about that, but I'm glad that I went through that experience. It eventually got picked up by HarperCollins and Harper Perennial and put out, and all of these other things happened, which proved it wrong, but it took me getting that feedback, not believing it, believing something different on behalf of the audience, and moving forward anyway. So I think that, and this is still something that's taking shape in my mind, but I think there needs to be a space for people to have a shot at developing an audience for themselves that's not necessarily that, all or nothing, big league, here's this title that we're going to throw so much behind, and if it doesn't make it, it's a sink or swim situation. I think there needs to be a treading water situation, a shallow water type of thing where authors can have the support to put their work out, have it published, build their audiences slowly, and be empowered to do that. So that's a lot of what I'm trying to work toward to help authors. I think it's going to have to fall on the authors themselves as well, more than what has been the traditional model. So I think that's what it's looking like, and that's kind of what I'm thinking needs to be advocated for, because some of these audiences, especially for these underrepresented perspectives, they've been sidelined. I mean, there are people just not reading because they're like, this isn't about me, or this isn't what I want to read, and I have other ways I can, use my time and other media I can consume. And so we've got to, empower the people who can pull their audiences in through the stories that haven't been told, to bring those people back in and expand this market and start to grow that way. That's what I'm thinking.
That was a great question. Oh, great. I'm going to make a note of this.
So HarperCollins is your publisher?
Yes,
Yeah.
Harper Perennial.
What was the relationship between you and Harper for book sales and pressure to, build a platform and deliver the audience, right?
So because I had a very unique situation, and I will say that Harper Perennial is the imprint under HarperCollins that publishes my books. They could not be more supportive, and I think it's probably unique in a lot of ways. And part of that is because I came to them having put the first editions of books 1 and 2 out on my own, and I had built an audience already. I'd sold almost 20,000 copies on my own. And so when I came to them, I had, and I also spent 2 years just developing my audience, just interacting with it, building community. That was my main focus, building community, because that's just what came naturally to me, and that was what was important to me about what I was doing. So when I came to them, I already had an audience, and I already had something that they believed that they could amplify. So there wasn't really a pressure on me per se to deliver sales. It was to keep doing what I was doing, and then to show up for what they presented me with opportunity-wise. So they really went all in. And we wound up doing the Target club pick was just huge. Good Morning America, GMA3. You know, they brought the PR opportunities. They brought the partnerships and the in-person opportunities. And because that the community foundation was already there, and I'd already kind of gotten the habit of interacting and the willingness to do that, the partnership was great. So they delivered what they could deliver as a large publisher, and I delivered what I could deliver, which is kind of working overtime as an author. It's a lot. It's not, you know, you got to write, and then you got to put your, you know, public persona hat on, and sometimes you don't necessarily feel like it, or sometimes it's, you know, beyond you. It's, you know, it's not something you're accustomed to doing, but you have to find it somewhere and show up and do it. And I think that's a lot to ask of an author, you know, but it's been a perfect partnership in this case for us. So hopefully that answered. And I will say also that I think that sometimes when you don't have you don't have the experience, and you show up with a large publisher, and there's an expectation to deliver sales or to step into this role that you have to step into as an author that's promoting your work, there's not a lot of support traditionally for that. There's nobody that's kind of, you know, showing you how to do that. So I think that's sort of a gap in the publishing space, to empowering and showing and teaching authors how to step into that, because it's not a natural thing to do necessarily.
How can you describe your book in one word?
Human. I would use that word, human, which hopefully encompasses everything else.
I wanted to toss one extra thing in. Did anyone? Is everyone okay? You kind of mentioned the aspects of rejection, where you were saying, you know, I guess publishers or whoever would be like, oh, we don't love this or something like that. And we see the finished product, which is you here being amazing and having amazing content. But what I don't hear about often, and if there are authors out there, I'm sure you guys have gone through this as well, but how do you navigate that rejection? Like what that criticism, like I imagine that is it's tough to say, you know, it must be tough to navigate. Like, is there advice that you would give people to?
Yeah, I mean, it's rough, you know, and I think one of the things is just not to believe that there's only one path forward. And I think also a couple things. Before I did anything with this book, I wrote intentions for it. I wrote a vision for what I was doing without anyone's input. I just wrote what was in my heart and what was driving me to even embark on this. And I had that. That was, you know, it was untouched by rejection or, you know, any of the things that would speak against it. I had this thing I had written down that I could always go back to that was like pure in that intention. And going back to that always reminded me of the why that I embarked in the first place. So that was this sort of grounding element that I had. The other thing is that some days I would just quit that day. I was done. Like that day. I quit this day. Like, I'm done with this. And just for that day, though. And I think sometimes you need to, when you feel like, you know, screw this, you know, this is too much. It is. So, like, that day, go do something else. You know, I'm like, I'm done. I'm not going to think about this anymore. I'm going to do something else. I quit today. And I gave myself the grace of that. And then the next day or the next day after that, I come back.
That's interesting, yeah.
But yeah, sometimes you need to quit temporarily.
Yeah.
And come back to it, though.
That's good advice, because we often don't realize, we don't know you don't remind yourself that that's an option. Like, you can build yourself back up for the next day. That's really interesting. Is there
Anyone else have any questions? Everybody good? All right. Well, I want to say thank you, all of you, for coming. This was a lot of fun. Jane, thank you for being here as well.